Yabba dabba doo! Do you guys know what today is? Cause I do. Today, we set the Flintstones and that motherfucking Great Kazoo behind us forever. That's right, today we are reviewing two movies. One, I've been looking forward to reviewing for a long time. The other, well, Matt sort of forced me to. He said because it features a certain green alien who I shall not name, it is obligatory. But to mark this special occasion, we've got all sorts of fun stuff. We've got guest stars, we've got this great Flintstone comics, we've got this little spaceship, I don't know who this guy is, and we got some milk, a bowl of cereal, and my favorite. But we have to watch the Flintstones and Flintstones Viva Rock Vegas. And now I'm going to have myself a little bit of a snack before we start. And just to add the milk. And now I can get started with the show. Did I get what I paid for? A Tale of Two Bedrocks, a supersized guest star filled spectacular.
Did somebody say guest stars?
Senator Eduardo, what are you doing here?
Just waiting for my dinero, senor.
Matthew, my pebbles!
So, for those living under a rock, The Flintstones was an animated sitcom of the 1960s. It was pretty much the honeymooners in the Stone Age. A cookie messed up one in which humans and dinosaurs interacted. And in 1994, Universal Pictures decided to make them relevant again. So they did a live-action version starring John Goodman and Rick Moranis. But the question is, was it any good?
Well, let's start with the effects. The few places in this movie where they don't work for me is when CGI was used. The process hadn't been perfected enough yet. And by going as practical as they could, they created this feel that Bedrock was a real place you could go. Yeah. I remember when Avatar came out, the James Cameron movie. People came out of that movie depressed because the real world wasn't like Pandora. And while I didn't feel the same way, I understood where these people were coming from. I had that same feeling back in 1994 while watching The Flintstones.
Another thing I want to talk about is the casting. John Goodman may hate this movie right now, but he brings something truly wonderful to Fred. He has this macho exterior, but underneath he's a big softie. He plays them as much of a well-rounded character as the movie would allow.
Rick Moranis as Barney is another brilliant bit of casting. He sort of wobbles a bit between his natural Canadian accent and his impression of Mel Blanc's Barney, which is a little distracting. But he has that everyman vibe you really need to inhabit that character.
Rosie O'Donnell, who I've always found cheerful to the point of annoyance, is perfectly cast as Betty Rubble. But then again, Betty has that same sort of cheerfulness disguising an insult.
Elizabeth Perkins, what can I say? When I watched that Red Dwarf episode backwards and Kat called Luma Flintstone the sexiest woman who ever lived, I didn't buy it. But if they had been watching the live action version, I totally get it. And need I remind you, this is a movie that has Halle Berry in it.
Speaking of, Halle Berry is often brought in as eye candy. And this movie is no exception to that, only it does suit her character as a femme fatale.
Kyle MacLachlan is over the top yet perfect as Cliff Vandercave. Don Florek is the embodiment of Mr. Slade. Jonathan Winters does his Jonathan Winters thing. But I got sort of freaked out when I saw Harvey Korman's name on the credits, but then I realized something.
He's not playing, you know.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Now on to the story. A lot of time when they take a TV show and turn it into a movie, things fail because they try to make things more complicated than they need to be and forget what makes the source material so great. In other words, what I call Lost in Space syndrome.
But the Flintstones is, well... The opening tells you just what you're in for. It's an almost beat-for-beat live-action reconstruction of the cartoon's opening sequence, including the pre-episode summary that you often don't see unless you're watching on a streaming service. From there it goes to a very Flintstone situation. Fred and Barney are driving home. Barney thanks Fred for loaning him a bunch of money, because now the Bedrock Adoption Agency will allow him to be a father. Fred says not to mention it. Barney takes this to mean Fred didn't exactly tell Wilma about this. Fred does his whole alpha male shtick, but then gives Barney a big old bear hug.
He gets home for dinner. Wilma is complaining they don't have enough money for a new garbage disposal. She thinks he lost at gambling again. But when Fred tells her the real reason, well, I'm trying to keep this review where you can put it up on YouTube for viewers 13 and up. So, yeah, the less I say, the better.
Nice going, Fred. Fred and Barney go bowling. The Order of the Water Buffalo team beat their rival. Fred makes the winning strike. Barney reads a poem about the power of friendship. It seems sort of cheesy, but it becomes important later. There is very little padding in this movie.
A few days later, Cliff and his secretary, Sharon Stone, not that Sharon Stone, tell the quarry workers they are going to have a test to get their new executive vice president. Everybody has to study and come into work on a Saturday. Barney sees that Fred isn't doing so well. He offers to take the test up for him. Then he switches them.
Fred is named executive vice president. His boss gives him his first assignment, which is to fire Barney. Whether this is because the test results say that Barney got the lowest score and is thus not an asset to the company, or is some sort of twisted loyalty test, we're not sure. From there, Fred is given a lot of papers to sign. His dictaphone, a bird, says signing stuff without reading it isn't a good idea. Fred doesn't listen. From there, the movie spends a good 20 minutes on the Flintstones and the Rubbles going on all sorts of crazy adventures, while the Flintstones live the high life, while Barney goes through more odd jobs than Homer during the 4th season of The Simpsons. Mr. Plow, that's my name. That name again is Mr. Plow.
Cliff's real plan starts to take shape. He calls the board together with an idea. He plans to modernize the quarry so they manufacture a lot more assembly line houses using machines. This would cut down on a lot of cruel, back-breaking work for the dinosaurs. But it would also put Bedrock out of work. But Slate and the board agree. During this part of the movie, Wilma comes into the office and sees the body language between Fred and Sharon and sees something that isn't there.
And something that is there and shouldn't be. During a double date between the Flintstones and the Rebels, we get our third act breakup. It turns out some of those papers Fred signed were pink slips for almost the entire staff of the plant. Fred doesn't believe this when he sees it on the news. Not only that, Barney doesn't show up for dinner. He's the busboy. He winds up spilling the beans on what he did. Fred doesn't believe that either. They get into a shouting match. and they're no longer friends. Wilma is so pissed off by Fred's behavior that when they get home, she smashes a bunch of their valuables and finally leaves him. About time.
Fred goes to work. He checks the records room. He sees what he has done. Cliff's plan was to build an automated plant using substandard parts and labor, but bills Slateko for using the higher cost stuff. He confronts Vandercave over this. Cliff says, "But you're to blame. Your name is on the account."
Fred becomes a fugitive. He winds up at a homeless camp run by former slate workers. One of them realizes who he is and forms a lynch mob. Barney shows up selling snow cones. He accidentally says everything that's happened is sort of his fault. They don't give him a chance to explain his side of things and decide to hang him too. So, all of a sudden, Fred and Barney are friends again. Oh, Fred.
Meanwhile, Wilma, Betty, and Wilma's mom are watching Bedrock's Most Wanted. Wilma realizes she still loves Fred. She notices the reenactment features the bird. Wilma and Betty decide to break into Slateko and go get it. But Cliff and Sharon spot them on their way out.
Fred and Barney escape the mob. They head to Wilma's mom's house. They find the women and Dino tied up. It turns out Cliff took the kids. He wants one of those old school Wild West, step into my trap at sunrise style showdowns. Cliff and Fred fight. Sharon double crosses Cliff, ensuring a victory for Fred and Barney.
Which just leads to a James Bond movie action-style death trap.
I can't prove it, but part of me thinks it's meant as an homage to their first big screen outing, A Man Called Flintstone.
Anyway, Bam Bam's super strength and Fred's bowling skills saved the day. Well, that and the weird mud created by Cliff's faulty machine.
The Flintstones and the Rebels talk things out with the authorities. They offer to help Sharon because she was vital to Pebbles and Bam Bam's escape. And then we get a live-action remake of the closing credits of the Flintstones. So, it's time to answer that question. Did I get what I paid for?
No! 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 I don't care how cheap it was.
As I said, I loved this movie in 1994. A lot of great movies came out that summer. I think I went to the movies every weekend that year. And I went to see the Flintstones at least 3 times. This movie is exactly what it wants to be. A 100% unashamed live-action version of the Flintstones. It's a concept that shouldn't work, especially given the effects of the time. But because they made Bedrock seem like a real place, and they cast it so perfectly, they made something that is really entertaining and fun to watch. Don't tell my film professors this, but I think I like this movie more than Forrest Gump. You want to know the best part? This movie came from a $4.99 or 3 for $12 bin somewhere. You know what else I got? What? The Maltese Falcon and Grosse Point Blank. One of those movies I want to get to at some point, assuming my dad will let me borrow his copy. Well, now that that's settled, let's talk about the sequel.
Oh, I'm not sticking around for that. The DVDs to use as Easter eggs up to the mid-season hiatus are in this red cross bag.
Wait, don't go! Oh, okay, fine, if you're gonna go, I'm gonna go to the bathroom and come back and shoot the rest of this tomorrow. Yes! Yes! The Flintstones Flintstones was the 5th highest grossing movie of 1994 and the 2nd highest grossing family film of the year, right behind The Lion King. So, a sequel was inevitable. And I am Iron Man. You would think with the movie being such a hit that the sequel would come out 2 or 3 years later. The movie sat in development hell for 5 years. During that time, the reputation of the original film had taken a bit of a hit. Not only that, the novelty of taking a classic animated series and turning it into a live-action film had run its course. No one from the original wanted to be in this movie. They even struggled to hold on to director Brian Levant. That's right, the director of Christmas Story 2 wanted nothing to do with this movie. John Goodman, gone. Rick Moranis, gone. Elizabeth Perkins, nope. Rosie O'Donnell found other things to do. Halle Berry had a career and wanted to keep it. Not even Kyle MacLachlan wanted to be in this movie. What do you have to be doing wrong that the guy from Showgirls wanted nothing to do with it? I really want to know. On the other hand, maybe I don't. But Universal had to do something with the franchise, or the rights would revert back to Warner Brothers. And they couldn't let the actual copyright holders make money off their own property, could they? So in 1999, they decided to recast every role, and they looked at what George Lucas was doing and said, yeah, let's do a prequel. Everybody loves those. No one complained about Phantom Menace. Let's see how well that went for them. We'll start with the most impressive part of the previous film, the sets. You know, when I was a kid, my family went to Ocean City, Maryland every summer. We went mini golfing every year too. When I was 6 years old, we found the best mini golf place ever. Why do I bring this up? Well, we went back to that one course about 10 years later. But instead of looking all nice, freshly painted, and having cool obstacles, the same decorations were up. But after years of sun and rain damage, they were all warped, twisted, unrecognizable, and falling apart. And that's exactly what you get with Flintstones Viva Rock Vegas. The dinosaur effects were inconsistent. Sometimes they looked as good as the original film. But when CG was used, they looked even more cartoonish and fake than they did in 1994. Other times, Dino looked like someone was doing that ancient Japanese art of making clay sculptures out of feces and decided to use that to do claymation. And some of the animatronics looked less like something out of the Jim Henson Creature Shop and more like something you'd see at a Chuck E. Cheese. The casting is god-awful. Instead of a brilliant performance by John Goodman, you get a barely adequate Mark Addy. Instead of the perfect foil for Fred that you have in Elizabeth Perkins, you get Kristen Johnson playing Wilma as a naive Amazon. Think Sally from Third Rock from the Sun in caveman times. Betty Rubble, a character whose only personality trait is that she has no personality. They cast Jane Krakowski. Who thought that was a good idea? Then you have this movie's one returning cast member, Harvey Korman. But he's not playing the Dictabird this time. He's playing Wilma's father, Colonel Slaghoople. Funny, because I remember him playing someone else on the show. I just can't remember who. Joan Collins replaces Elizabeth Taylor as Wilma's mom, because that makes sense. Kyle MacLachlan is replaced by Thomas Gibson. Halle Berry is replaced by a block of wood. I know people who wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And it features Alan Cumming as the Great Gazoo. I want to give this movie props for one bit of casting. Stephen Baldwin as Barney Rubble. He's the best thing in this movie. Rick Moranis was a great Barney, but he vacillated between his own natural accent and doing an impression of Mel Blanc. Stephen Baldwin gets the Flintstones, he gets Barney, and he owns the cartooniness of it. This whole movie is sort of weird. There are 7 mini-stories going on instead of one continuous plot. So everything from the recycled sets, recycled props, bad CGI, recasting with young actors, it makes it feel less like a movie and more like a really long pilot for a live-action Flintstones TV series. The first story begins in outer space. Kazoo is being punished for failing in his role as an intergalactic observer. Again. That's right, his species follows the Federation's prime directive of non-interference. So they decide they're going to send him to a planet where he has little to no chance of screwing it up because there's nothing you could really call a civilization there. That's right, Earth. The second story is, well, do you remember the test portion of the original film? Do you wish it had been more like a carnival game? Because for Fred, that's what it is. But Barney, well, it's more like Fear Factor. He's gotta stick something up a brontosaurus's, you know. Fred passed the test with one boulder left to go. The proctor had already given him an A, so he got a little overexcited and pulled his crank, crushing the test examiner. Oops. And I hope you like the quarry because that's pretty much all you see of it in the movie. Our third movie begins at this big mansion. Wilma's sister is having a bridal shower and getting all these fancy presents. Wilma's mom asks, "Wilma, when are you getting married?" And then bugs her to get back together with her ex-boyfriend. The guests are getting bored with all the stupid bridal shower games. Wilma suggests going into Bedrock and going bowling. Everyone laughs at her. Then, Wilma's aforementioned ex-boyfriend, Chip Rockefeller, shows up. Wilma gets pissed off and has one of those spoiled little rich girl tantrums. Oh, and a quick side note. Anyone over the age of 7 who still goes by Chip is evil. Chip Martin, Chip Kelly, and most especially Chip Essen. Back in movie 2, Fred doesn't feel like celebrating his promotion. He'd rather skim rocks off the surface of a lake like a hobo. But then this big burning rock from the sky crashes into the lake. Fred and Barney go to investigate. What do you know? It's Kazoo's ship. They pull him out. Barney demands 3 wishes. Kazoo spends the rest of the night explaining who he is, where he comes from, why he's there, and what his mission is. When they get home, he explains his mission is to observe human mating rituals, so he wants to see Fred and Barney bang. I don't know what's more sickening, that this scene is so homophobic and dated, or that Alan Cumming agreed to do it. You'd think an openly bisexual LGBT rights activist might have put his foot down. We cut to Wilma at a fast food restaurant. It looks a lot like McDonald's from the first movie, but it clearly isn't. McDonald's didn't want to pay the product placement. I think it's a Brontosaurus Burger King now. Wilma asks the waitress how much a water costs. She says it's free. So Wilma says she'll take 2. Betty thinks she's homeless and offers to take her in and help her find a job. The next day, Fred and Barney go to lunch. Betty is their waitress. Fred is love struck. That's right, Fred falls for Betty. Barney is head over heels for Wilma. Fred tries to ask Betty out, but gets tongue-tied. Kazoo tries to help, but it's sort of a prank. You see, only Fred and Barney can see Kazoo. So everyone around them thinks they're crazy. But Kazoo still manages to coax Fred into saying just what he needs to say in order to get Betty to go out with him. We've reached the 1/3 point of the movie, so plots 1, 2, and 3 sort of disappear, and at least for the next 20 minutes, they take the Great Kazoo with them. But that's okay because movie 4 starts with Fred, Betty, Barney, and Wilma driving to the carnival in silence. This reminds me of a sextuple date I went on once. I knew this long-time couple. They knew two nice, single, geeky girls. They knew a friend of mine and I were single. So they arranged for the 6 of us to go on a picnic. The one they were trying to set me up with, she wasn't my type. And my friend wasn't clicking with the one they were trying to set him up with either. But, much like Fred and Barney, when we got to where we were going, things sort of took their natural course. The problem with this scene is that it's pointless. It is a non-solution to a non-problem. The moment that everyone realizes that Betty and Barney are more interested in rides, and Fred and Wilma are more interested in games and shows, they just split off and do their own thing. Fred teaches Wilma to bowl. They win an egg. Fred says, "These things never last more than a week." The one ride we see Fred and Wilma on is the Ferris wheel. And they're about to make out when their egg hatches. And what do you know? It's Dino! And then we get the 5th montage of this movie. It shows the happy couple doing all sorts of lovey-dovey stuff. You know, we've only gotten 1 reference to Rock Vegas and 5 montages so far. Are you sure this shouldn't be Flintstones Attack of the Montages? Story number 5 begins with Wilma's mom showing up at Betty's doorstep. She demands to see Wilma, dragging her away, kicking and screaming. You know, like she thinks Betty's apartment is some sort of Rocktology recruitment center. But nope, she just wants Wilma there for her father's birthday tomorrow. Wilma, Betty, Barney, and Fred dress to the nines. Fred picks a fight with the valet thinking he's a car thief. I'll give this to story number 5. Unlike story number 4, it has a point, and it knows what it wants to be. It's a Palantir all-fruit commercial. No, wait, it's a comedy of manners. But, judging by Chip's reaction to finding out that Fred is a Bronto crane operator, maybe I was right the first time. We cut back to Fred and Barney's house. Dino is tied to a tree, and he's pissed off for being left outside for so long. He's powerful enough that he's able to uproot the tree and drag it with him all the way to Slaghoople Manor. Addle-brained Colonel Slaghoople is alone with Wilma. He thinks it's her birthday and not his, so he gives her a present. And not just any present. Her great-grandmother's pearls. During the feast, Chip makes the ultimate dick move. Even though Wilma brought a date, he's the one to give the toast honoring the Colonel. Fred makes his own toast praising Wilma. In it, he mentions his membership in the Order of the Water Buffalo. He doesn't notice, but the Colonel joins him in the anthem and dance. But the whole thing is ruined by Dino bursting into the room. The guests start to flee. The only one who seems to want Dino there are Fred, Wilma, and the Colonel. But who gives a fuck what he wants? He's only the birthday boy. Chip tells Fred the best man won. And to celebrate, they should go to his new casino in Rock Vegas to see Mick Jagger and the Stones. But there's something not quite right about the way he says it. I feel like I've turned on a really weird episode of Criminal Minds where Agent Hotchner is the unsub, or maybe just Thomas Gibson in real life. And then we get a montage of every crazy thing there is to do in Rock Vegas. This includes Fred playing craps, Barney eating everything in sight, and the girls attending various stage shows. Meanwhile, Chip is in his office being evil. So evil that while he's within arm's reach and could change the channel on the TV himself, he uses the remote just to piss off the little bird inside. While discussing his evil plans with his executive assistant, Roxy, she tells him that 2 mobsters are here to see him. Because this movie insists on using every obscure Flintstones character possible, yup, Rocco and Rocco, played by Tony Longo and Danny Woodburn. Woodburn is perfectly cast. But if they wanted to capture the true height disparity between the two, maybe they should have gone for Karel Struyakin for Big Rocco. The mobsters tell him the boss wants his money and he wants it now. Chip has 24 hours to get it or else. Chip tells him, no problem. By tomorrow morning, I am going to be married to Wilma Slaghoople. And who overhears this? That's right, Gazoo is back. Meanwhile, Fred is winning big. Barney and Gazoo tell him something's not right about that. Chip comes by and says, Fred, you should be playing with the high rollers. I'll be glad to set you up with credit. Fred takes the challenge. Barney tries to warn him, but then Roxy drags him off to the buffet. Chip convinces Wilma to put her pearls in a safe. She doesn't realize what's going on. But then again, in this movie, Wilma is fucking stupid. The girls find Fred, but they don't see Barney. Fred says Barney has gone to the buffet. Betty says, well, we better find him because we're due at that Mick Jagger concert in a few minutes. Now that Fred is a gambling addict, Chip goes back to his office. It turns out he has this big machine that alters the probability of winning for just one person, and it's tuned to Fred Flintstone. He flicks the switch and it goes from win mode to lose mode. Fred winds up $1 million in debt. Chip says he'll forget the whole thing if Fred agrees to never see Wilma again. Fred tells him to get bent. So Chip switches to plan B. Meanwhile at the buffet, Barney is talking to Roxy. They see a waiter carrying this giant pie that Barney hasn't tried yet. Roxy whistles to him. The waiter turns around. He trips. The pie hits Roxy in the face and cleavage. Barney grabs a towel to help her clean off. That's exactly when Betty walks in. And then she storms off. Betty runs off to mope, and who should come by but Mick Jagger? That's right, Alan Cumming again. He tries to comfort her, but decides to take advantage of the situation and sweep her off her feet. And now for the seventh and final movie. Well, after we get through another montage, back in the lobby, Chip pulls an alarm. A crowd gathers. He tells them there's a criminal loose in the hotel. Lots of the guests start confessing to small innocuous crimes. Chip says it's something much bigger than that. Somebody has stolen $1 million pearl necklace. The guards start searching everyone. Chip looks in Fred's pockets himself, and what do you know? There they are. Fred and Barney wind up in the hotel's private holding cell until the police arrive. And guess who shows up again? That's right, Gazoo. He gives them info on what is really going on, but can't do much more because of his oath. He tells them, in order to do anything about it, they have to escape. The guard has left the room, but left a bag of snacks on his desk. Barney gets really hungry. He slips to the bars, walks across the room, gets them, and comes back. Fred asks him how he did it. Barney shows him. Fred says, now this time come back with the key. So he does. Once they escape from prison, Fred and Barney realize they're going to need a disguise. Some Like It Hot must have been on in the background in the writer's room, because I can think of no other reason why anyone would want to put Fred and Barney in chorus girl outfits. Unfortunately for them, their charade lasts all of 2 minutes. The guards start chasing him, and somehow Fred and Barney wind up in Mick Jagger's room. They see Betty there. Barney gets pissed off. He confronts Jagger. They have a fight. Somehow, Barney wins. Jagger is impressed by the show of true love, and he offers to let Fred and Barney join his show, so Fred can try to win Wilma back. Fred sings a song, and that seems to be all it takes to reclaim Wilma's heart. Well, that, and Chip being a complete idiot. From there, we get a double wedding scene that includes a medley of both Meet the Flintstones and the song Viva Rock Vegas. And that's the end of the movie. Well, there's one little scene between Gazoo and Dino, but no, I'm not touching that. I don't want to go anywhere near interspecies relations between a Martian and a dinosaur. I'm sorry, no. Just no. So, did I get what I paid for?
No!
This movie was in a $2 2-pack. Too bad I already own a copy of the Flintstones. Not only that, it's a double-sided DVD. Those things are next to impossible to keep clean and scratch-free. I had to scrub it down with Windex before each time I played it while reviewing it. The disc barely played. So just on a physical level, you'd have to say the answer is no. But let's look at this from an artistic standpoint, shall we? The story is an absolute mess. The effects are awful. I've seen Sci-Fi Channel original movies that look better than this. And the acting, oh my god. Stephen Baldwin is the best thing in this. You know, Stephen Baldwin. The guy you get when you want Alec Baldwin but can't even afford Billy. This movie didn't make Stephen Baldwin an actor. It is just so bad. I mean, fucking awful. That it makes Stephen Baldwin seem like a genius. You would think Harvey Korman would be a saving grace of this movie. But for the last decade or so of his life, his health wasn't that great. He wasn't capable of giving a performance the energy they did on, say, Carol Burnett Show, or any of those films he did with Mel Brooks. It was a nice touch to include him, but you know, in a way it's kind of sad. Because his career began and ends with the Flintstones. If that weren't bittersweet enough, I have even more reason to just let go of my rage this time. This was it. This was Flintstones Viva Rock Vegas. After today, I never have to mention the Flintstones or the Great Gazoo on my channel ever again. So while this was a truly horrific cinematic experience that I have no desire to ever repeat, I feel free. Well, I better look inside this Red Cross bag to see what Matt picked out for me to watch up until the mid-season hiatus. An 8-pack of family films. It includes the original borrowers. Disaster the movie. Team America World Police. Star Trek the Animated Series. Manos the Hands of Fate. And, fuck me. If I'm going to watch Manos before the mid-season hiatus, I'd better make a phone call. But I'm gonna roll the credits first and do that as a post-credit sequence. Torgo, how's it going, man?
Hello, this is Torgo. I look after the place while the master is away.
How would you like to be in an episode of Did I Get What I Paid For?
The master would not approve.
Well, I thought that might be the case. I just thought I'd ask.
It'll be dark soon.
No, relax, Torgo. It's not for a few more months. Just meet over here at my place. Or maybe at Matt's.
There are no such places around here. There is no escape from here. It'll be dark soon. There is no escape from here. It'll be dark soon.
Just try to make it. Please, 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 for me, buddy.
I'll be over when I can. be dark soon.